Welcome back to another reading and correcting with me, Kindar, the Tiger Writes, and Ty, the Tiger Supervisor. These are where I read a chapter from one of my stories and correct it as I go. If you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. If you want to support me, that is on my Patreon. Today we are doing chapter 61 of Breaking Step. The crowd gathered. Uh, the crowd gathered into the vacated space created by the removal of the stalls was mostly runners. This is what happens. I will start a thought and it will shift halfway through and I won't realize it. Really, you do not like that comma. The crowd gathered into the vacated space created by the removal of the stalls was mostly runners. The only ones Tibs saw who weren't were the townsfolk who'd paused in their shopping at the further stalls and permanent shops to watch. Among the nobles who were on one side of the field, Lombardo had waved at him. You know what? Let's make this more immediate. Waved at him, tried to break away, only for Palden to grab his arm. The exchange had been heated. If I'm going to do that, this becomes was heated, but the younger noble didn't act as cowed as Tib had seen during the run. Lamberto shrugged, gave Tibbs another wave, and stayed by his siblings. The runners broke into their teams as more of them arrived until they were all there. It felt strange for there not to be the crowd of Omegas from the previous times. Was the guild really satisfied with only these few teams to do the runs now that the fourth floor could be reached? The woman who took position a few steps higher was a clerk of some sort, with water as her element. Certainly not a guard. She dressed well, and Tib sensed the medallion around her neck. It had the same feel as the one he'd copied from Brogan. She'd been one of she she'd been no, she was one of the more important clerks. Welcome back, she announced, smiling. I'm glad to see we didn't lose anyone this time around. Really? Quigley muttered, stepping next to Tibbs and his team. What happened? No one knew to impress, so the higher ups figured we didn't merit more than a clerk. As you can tell, she continued cheerfully, the dungeon has reopened its door. This means the fourth floor is now accessible to anyone strong enough to clear the third. Been there, Manas. Quigley's rogue said, done that, didn't even get scars to prove it. There was pride in how the clerk stood and spoke. Whatever the runners might think of her, being the one to explain how things would proceed going forward, she felt it was something she'd earned. Now that the dungeon is lambda, there will be changes. No, really? Don drawled. However, will we deal with it? The first one is that clerics will be joining any team with row or any team with okay, we'll be joining any team row or higher. Those teams will be allowed to switch out one of the two runners occupying the same role, but will not be required to do so. Do remember that the dungeon is also getting stronger and that it could stop giving healing potions as rewards at any time. A healer on your team can make all the difference, even if they won't be fighting. They shrugged at Jackal's questioning look as mutters spread among the runners. Stowe hadn't responded when he walked by the cliff the previous evening, and he wasn't commenting on the announcement, so he was busy elsewhere. The two archers on Quigley's team studied each other before looking at their team leader. No, the warrior said, I'm not saddling us with someone who can't fight. If you choose not to take one now, she said, Once the muttering died down, you will have to take one when one of those two runners die. More muttering. Not if, Mez pointed out. The dungeon will be eating a lot of us on the fourth. Yeah. This is the dungeon will be eating a lot of us on the fourth floor. Don replied with confidence. Makes you wonder why the guild isn't bringing anyone new, Jekyll said, looking at the sorcerer. All the cells are empty. The kings have had enough of not having anyone to release when they felt the city needed to see that they were benevolent. Quigley snorted. I never read about guild procedure, Dawn replied. It wasn't something I considered I'd have to deal with before, and once I was here, I didn't want to know the details of what waited for me. The second change, she raised her voice over the still not dead muttering, is that you now have to decide which floor you will run before your name can be added to the board. You are only allowed to run that floor unless you clear it. Then you are allowed to continue on to the next one. You also can only request a floor you are able to access directly through the doorway. This time the rising conversations that forced her to pause was more questions than outrage. Is there anyone left who's Omega? Quickly asked Tibs, who shook his head. There were 3 Upsilon teams, 7 who had enough member at Lambda they might qualify as such, but the bulk of the runners were Rho. Tibbs didn't know if the final classification would be based on the lowest floor that any team could access. If so, there were no Lambda team yet. Who's going to run the first floor then? Manas asked. It may be possible the guild counts on some of the Upsilon team to lack the confidence needed to travel the second floor. This needs to be assigned to someone. So Dawn will be the one saying it, as I don't want to name anyone else on Quigley's team since they're not going to stick around. Any team that doesn't inform us of which floor they intend to run by the end of the day before the board goes up will automatically be assigned to the lowest floor they have reached. How much time each floor gets will be adjusted based on the previous runs. The protests were loud this time. If they give us less than half of the day to clear the third floor, Jekyll told Dawn, you need to have a talk with the guild leader. Why me? She likes Tibs better. You're less likely to kick her in the shin, the fighter replied. I'm not going to kick her, Tibs said. I need her to think I like her. That's why Dawn needs to be the one talking to her, Mez said, so she won't anger you so much you'll lose control. Now, she said once the protests were down to muttering again, I expect you're wondering why there are so few of you here for this announcement. I was wondering that before you even opened your mouth, bitch, Markel said. He was Quigley's latest sorcerer. The previous one had been kicked off the team after arguing leadership roles. Tibbs had asked the warrior how he'd managed it, since the rule was that only dead team members could be replaced, and Quigley had smiled and said that not making himself the enemy of the person who enforced the rules had been his first step. Going forward, she continued, the guild will accept anyone interested in running the dungeon. Anyone who can pay, you mean, Don muttered. At this moment, representatives are in the cities explaining the procedures for those who seek to improve themselves and their lives. A silver, not one of them, is going to talk about how easy the dungeon is going to eat anyone new to it. Quigley said. That's a sucker's bet. Jekyll replied, why do you think they kept going to the cells for runners? Now, no one in their right mind wants to run a dungeon. We expect you to be considerate of those new runners. They will be your compatriot until you reach Epsilon. You are going to be so busy helping them, Tibbs, Manas said, grinning. Then it's a good you'll be helping, he replied. These civilian runner teams will come below you in priority, she said, as Manas was quietly ribbed by his team. You can change which floor you intend to run at any time before you do your run, but that will put you at the end of the list of guild runners for that floor. Who'd want to do anything but the lowest floor they can? Jekyll asked. That's where the best loot is going to be. Actually, Don mused, depending on how the scheduling is arranged, I can think of a few times. I can think of times where it might be to a team's advantage to hop floors. Care to explain? Jekyll asked. Only after I see how the schedule is structured. They might have seen them coming and arranged things to keep us from doing it. Don considered something. And it might not be worthwhile until we have unlocked the 4th floor. That will be all, she announced. If you want to do a floor other than the lowest, you can then your lowest. See the loot. The loot collection table. The schedule will be up tomorrow. Wait, why isn't she announcing that the team of heroes is going first? Jekyll asked, disappointed. Wouldn't make a difference, quickly said. My team's going to be the first one to set foot on the 4th floor. Not if we go in before you, Jekyll grinned. There's no way you clear the 3rd floor the first time you go back in. I have a goal that says we will. Jekyll, Tibs warned. It's my goal, Tibs. I can double it any way I want. I'm with Tibs, Bess said. You should listen to your team, Jekyll, quickly said. I'd hate to take that kind of money from you. The fighter snorted. No, you wouldn't, and don't worry about feeling bad. It's not going to happen. The warrior shrugged. All right, whoever gets to the 4th floor first gets a gold from the other team leader. I'm so glad you changed the win conditions, Jekyll said, grinning, because now there's no way I'm losing. Quigley laughed. We cleared the floor already. It's just more of the same for us. Then, may the better team win. Tibs' name was the first for those doing the 3rd floor. You got your wish, Mess said, even if she didn't announce it to everyone yesterday. She probably wanted to avoid the nobles rebelling. Tirania told them she didn't care how they felt when that noble tried to argue they should be going in before us, Tibs said. And that was with me agreeing with them. I don't think any of them even ever bothered after that. He faced his team. We have 3 days to train. 5 teams were going in on that day. 3 for the 2nd floor and 2 for the 3rd. No one had opted to redo the 1st. The name for the 2nd floor only went on for 4 days, while those for the 3rd stretched to the middle of the following week. You think our next run comes after the last team do the 3rd run? Jekyll asked. The civilian teams will go there, Don replied. I think they'll put us after them if there aren't enough to complete the week. There won't be, Mess said. Anyone Upsilon or above is part of the guild. King's Knights aren't, Quigley said, joining them at the board. Achieving knighthood is arduous enough. Some have been known to unlock the potential to have an element. The guild used to try to take them from the kings, claiming ownership of anyone with an element, but they found that while officially the guild is its own kingdom, they still rely on the others to have access to what their cities need. All they did was withhold access to the places an audience could be obtained, but the kings found places the guild didn't control. The silence stretched as Tibs and his friends and Quigley's team stared at him. What? The warrior asked with a chuckle. I was planning on dethroning a king. I did my research. Fortunately, he didn't have any knight with an element. It would have been a quick war if he had. But they still need to go through the 1st and 2nd floor, Miss said. Even if they are row, she said a team can only request a floor they can reach through the doorway. Well, some will have to be Upsilon, Don said. Since without a dungeon it's extremely difficult to grow in power, an element allows someone to have more time and makes them harder to kill. I expect that any of them who want to start on the lower floor will be provided a guide to take them there and show them how to open it themselves. That's cheating, Jekyll said. It's only cheating, Don replied, if it isn't the guild doing it, or they aren't being paid enough to ignore it, he added mockingly. It doesn't matter, Tibs said. We go in first, and there's only 8 places for those nights' team. Then it's the next week and a new schedule. Craigle Rock felt like the bazaar had just set up. The booths were packed tighter around the transportation platform, and the merchants yelling over each other for the attention of anyone stepping down from it. Even Daran had set up one, somehow managing a place only a few booths away from the steps. He was already selling sword and armor to a group with thin Upsilon essence, fire, metal, the golden color of void, and the shifting color of crystal, and the shifting color of crystal and the sparkling of lightning. A lot of groups were composed of 5 people, and most of them didn't have an element or any denser essence than the townsfolk. And few of them were dressed richly enough to have been able to afford whatever the guild asked. Or was the guild not charging as much for anyone without essence as a way to feed Stowe? What do you know about the dungeon? Tibs asked a boy. Man, he looked to be slightly older than Jackal, but had youth in his expression, as if this was more than he had ever seen. He was dressed better than the townsfolk, a merchant's sons, maybe? It's a place to get power and riches, the boy replied with wonder, then stared at Tibs, his eyes growing wide. You're one of them, you're a runner. Right, his eyes. People in Craggle Rock no longer noticed them, seeing as how they all knew who the runners were. You know the dungeon's dangerous, right? So? The boy said dismissively. Anything worth getting comes with a little danger. It's not a little danger. You're younger than me and you made it. Hey, Carol, wait up. He ran off to join a group of girls and another boy his age. He tried again and received a similar reaction. As far as he could tell, they had heard about what the dungeon did, but either the stories had been told in a way to make Stowe seem less dangerous than he was, or too many heard bards sing stories of great adventures and wealth to be gotten in dungeons. Tibs certainly had heard too many of those from the bards that visited the inn, and no heroes of their story failed. How was he going to keep them from just being eaten? Could Daran get him enough using the promises to help all of them? Few looked to have equipment for the runs. Were they going to rely on the crap the guild provided? Should he even try to help them survive the floor? Could he convince them they needed help? You look, Tibs jumped and turned. About to jump off the abyss. Cross finished, raising an eyebrow. The day I can sneak up on the rogue is the day he's in trouble. She considered something. What have you done now? Nothing. And I'm offended you think I did something. You did do something. You're Tibs Lightfingers. The bards are going to sing of how you're always up to something that baffled the guards. Bards better never sing about me, he replied darkly. She shrugged. You never know. You might end up as some famous adventurer once you leave here. I'll be able to tell all my friends that how I knew the great Lightfingers when he was just a little boy, no taller than this, no more than this tall. She placed a hand on his head. He batted it away. I'm always going to be this tall. The denser our essence is, the less we grow. And with how dense his essence was, Tibs figured that if the guild assigned a rank by that, he'd already be in the wilds with them forcing him to fight one thing or another. What's got you contemplating finding out how long it takes to reach the bottom of the abyss? Tibs motioned around them. They're all going to die, and I can't do anything about it. Not all of them. He glared at her. And that's supposed to make it better? Some will live to be powerful and used by the guild. The rest, a lot more of them, are going to be food for the dungeon. They attracted stares, but no one acted like he just said they were going to die. Tibbs put her fingers to her mouth and let out a shrill whistle. I need a team who's here for the dungeon to talk with. There were a lot of confused expressions, but a group of 5 tentatively approached. 3 girls and 2 guys, Jekyll's age or slightly younger. The girl in the lead said something Tibbs didn't understand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Rala. I'm wondering why you are here. Rala replied, losing the hesitation as she spoke, growing enthusiastic. Here and there, words had light on them, but nothing so bright Tibbs felt they were outright lies. Tibbs nodded. And did they tell you about the danger? The reply had a clear, dismissive tone. And you don't think that maybe they made it sound easier than it's going to be? The reply was sharp this time, offended. The girl pointed at Tibbs, added something in the tone that carried insult. She turned and walked off, her team glaring at Cross before joining her. There you go, Cross said. I didn't understand what they said. Cross started to protest, but closed her mouth. Right, we both have the language enchantment. She heard about the dungeon being open to everyone and formed a team and convinced the people who recruited them that they were right to be runners. She was warned of the danger, but she doesn't care. Too many stories of how easy it is to beat the dungeon, Tibbs grumbled. No, too much need to escape what her situation was, I expect. She's going to die. They all are. Fine, not all of them. But why are so many of coming here? This can't be the best there is for them. She studied him. Tibbs, just how many do you think just how many do you think these people represent of those who tried to come? I don't know, a lot. Look around. She shook her head. Tibbs, I can make out 6 different languages from here. These people, these would-be runners, they're from all over the world, from a lot of different from from a lot of different kingdoms. This might look like a lot of people to you, but it's only a fraction of those who wanted to come, of those who didn't care about any of this. I doubt the cities, plural, the cities they came from will even notice they are gone. She paused. You know what fractions are, right? I do accounts, he replied sharply and left it at that, trying to understand how many places could have so many people. Them leaving wouldn't be noticed. None of the cities he traveled to had felt that way. Yes, some part of them had more people, but they couldn't all have been so packed. Jekyll spoke of the people working for his father leaving and not being noticed, but it was also clear Sebastian hadn't been a man who noticed people unless they mattered to him. You need to understand what that desperation doesn't look the same for everyone, Tibbs, Cross said. For some, it screams and clawing at everything until they get what they need. Others dressed and act like everything is good while the world crumbles inside them. I'm not saying everyone who came here is desperate. I expect most just believed Bard's song or whatever the recruiters told them. But for some, this, no matter how dangerous it is better than what they had before. I think you'd know that. I wasn't given a choice, Cross. If you were, if you'd been told there was a chance things could be better than what was on your street, would you have done? What would you have done? Tip swallowed. He wanted to deny he'd ever considered this to escape his street, but he didn't need light to know it was a lie. How do I tell those who are here chasing riches and power and those for whom this is better than where they came from? If he could only help... This is French slipping through. If he could only help a few of them, he would make the help count for something. Her laugh was bitter. Magic? I don't know, Tibbs. Some, you'll see it on their face. Others won't admit to it even with a knife cutting their throat. People are strange that way. They'll claim one thing and act in a different one. Her hand moved to her stomach with a suddenness that made her Tibs think she hadn't meant to put it there. Anyway, I have to go back to making sure no one tries anything. She stepped away and looked over her shoulder. That means you too, Tibs. I better not catch you trying anything. Don't worry, he replied. You won't catch me. A glass high, someone called, and Tibs glanced in the direction of the standing man, in time for them to burst out laughing, looking at the tankard in their hand. Tibs' first thought was that he and the four others dressed similarly at the table were nobles. The clothing certainly the clothing certainly was fine enough to mark them as minor ones, but there was a casualness about them sitting there in the inn, surrounded by common folks nobles never adopted. Even the nice one, like Emilia, had an air of superiority about her, and one of the women at the table whispered something to the server, placing plates that had him blushing but smiling. The five of them had metal as their elements. By the concentration, they were at the edge of a row, but on which side, Tibs wasn't sure. The standing man turned towards Tibs' table. A tankard high for the hero of Craggle Rock. Yeah, you know what? Tibs looked for Dawn, only to realize he'd left during the distraction. Everyone in the inn was looking at Tibs. Age matters not to those of strong heart. Size means nothing to those of determination. A knight is in the doing and not the claiming. He downed his tankard and let out a satisfied sigh. May the light fingers keep his city safe until the abyss claims the land. Tankards and cheese went up, while Tibs tried to shrink in his seat until he disappeared. The rest of his teammates joining in with the knights did not help. Well, that's a load of crap, Quigley said, dropping into Dawn's chair as the cheers quieted. You don't think he means the compliment for Tibs? Jekyll asked, motioning to Khrushchev for a refill. The warrior snorted. Do you know where knights come from? The army, I'm guessing, Jekyll said. Another snort. They come from nobles' asses. And trust me, being put through the trials to get an element doesn't improve their attitude about being so much better than everyone else. I thought you hadn't met any, Mez said. Oh, I met plenty of knights on the battlefield. I had to cut down most of their men so I could go and teach them a lesson about leading from the rear. Mez looked at the five at the table. Tibs stifled a chuckle at this as the server was now on the woman's lap and she fed him grapes. They don't seem to be like that, the archer said. They're just putting on air, so no. Mez's tone had finality to it that made Quigley raise an eyebrow. I won't dispute that you met a horrible example of what a knight should be, just like we've all met horrible nobles, but I won't accept that those represent all of them. There are those for whom being a noble means accomplishing good things, helping and protecting, not lording. It has to be the same for knights. The warrior shook his head. That's because you never let it rest, Khrushchev said, putting a tankard before his man. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I've been around enough people to start by getting to know them before judging them. Not that you don't fall victim to judgmentality, Jekyll said with a smirk. You deserved it, the server replied. I'm telling you, Quigley said, most of them are going to be no better than nobles. Most, Mez said, standing, but not all. He headed for the knight's stable. Some nobles are nice, Tibs said, ignoring the stare from Jekyll and focusing on his breathing. It didn't feel good saying it, but it was the truth. Some nobles weren't as bad as the others, and some of them were actually nice. There was one thing talking with Dawn had showed Tibs was that he needed to stop assuming everyone in a group was the same. And that concludes Chapter 61 of Breaking Step. If you are enjoying this, please leave a like. If you want to know when the next chapter is going to be up, subscribe and hit the bell. If you want to read the story and the other books in that series, they are up for free on Royal Road. If you want to read ahead of Royal Road and support me at the same time, that is on my Patreon. And if you want to listen to these live, it's every Tuesday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern Time on Twitch. The links are in the notes. And with that, I shall wish you a good day.